Don't move, Ethan Graves muttered to himself, eyes barely open as he lay perfectly still on the velvet couch. He wasn't sleeping, he was watching. Across the room, sunlight slid through tall windows, cutting golden lines across the marble floor. A few crisp $100 bills lay scattered on the coffee table in front of him, bait glinting in the morning light. He'd placed them there himself. The mansion was quiet, too quiet for his liking. Even the ticking of the antique clock felt suspicious. Ethan had built his fortune on reading people, on knowing their weaknesses before they knew them themselves. But the new maid, her silence unsettled him. Lily, 22, polite, shy to the point of invisibility. The kind of girl who apologized to furniture if she bumped into it. He didn't trust anyone that quiet. The clock struck 8. Footsteps approached, soft, hesitant. She entered, carrying her dusting cloth and a small bucket, her movements neat and cautious. Her dark hair was tied back, and her eyes lowered to the ground. Ethan watched through half-lidded eyes as she paused near the table. She saw the money. Her breath hitched, barely noticeable, but to him, it was everything. He'd seen men crumble under far less temptation. Her hand trembled as she reached toward the bills. Ethan's pulse quickened. Would she take it? Would she prove him right? Instead, she gently gathered the bills, aligned their edges, and placed them neatly in the center of the table. Her face was unreadable, calm. Then she reached into her apron and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope, old, sealed, and clearly carried for a long time. She placed it beside the money, her hand lingering there for a few seconds. "Forgive me," she whispered softly, so faintly he almost thought he imagined it. When she left the room, Ethan sat up, grabbed the envelope, and stared at the shaky handwriting on the front, Mr. Graves. Inside was a folded note and a faded photograph of a woman standing in front of the mansion gates. His late mother, before illness, took her smile. The note read, "Sir, I found this money yesterday under the couch while cleaning. I didn't know who it belonged to, but I thought it best to return it. Also, this photograph fell behind the cabinet in your mother's room. I believe she meant to keep it close. Thank you for letting me work here. My mother once told me this house saved her life. I hope I can return that kindness someday." Ethan stared at the photo, then at the envelope, his throat tightening. His mother had always believed in hiring people who needed second chances. People like Lily's mother, apparently. He hadn't known. He sank back on the couch, the sound of the clock echoing through the hollow silence. For the first time in years, Ethan Graves realized that not every quiet soul hides deceit. Some carry grace loud enough to change even the coldest hearts. "Thank you for giving me work, Mr. Graves. It means more than you know." Ethan stared at the words written in neat, looping handwriting. Inside the envelope, along with the note, was a photograph of a little girl, maybe 10, lying in a hospital bed, clutching a worn teddy bear. On the back, in the same careful script, it said, "My sister, Emma. I'm saving for her treatment." For the first time in years, Ethan felt something inside him crack open. The note trembled slightly in his hands as guilt pressed heavy against his chest. He'd tested this girl, set a trap like she was some petty thief, and instead found honesty, dignity, and love. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the photo. The little girl's smile reminded him of his own sister, Emily, who had died when he was too busy chasing mergers and money to notice how sick she'd become. He'd buried that memory deep, but now it clawed its way back, raw and unforgiving. In the days that followed, Ethan watched Lily more closely, but not the way he had before. She arrived early every morning, her uniform pressed though clearly old, and stayed late, never once complaining. He saw how she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear before entering his mother's room, how she spoke softly to the old woman who could barely move, reading aloud from a tattered book with a patience that felt almost holy. His mother, once silent and withdrawn, had started smiling again. And still, Lily never mentioned her sister, never asked for help. She just worked, grateful for the little she had. One stormy night, thunder shaking the windows, Ethan wandered through the dimly lit halls, restless. He stopped outside the kitchen door and saw her sitting at the small table, eating a crust of bread with tea. She looked up at the lightning, her face caught between fear and wonder. Something about that fragile courage pulled at him. For the first time in decades, Ethan Graves, who'd built his empire on ruthless efficiency, felt something close to shame. The next morning, before dawn, he called his accountant. He didn't explain much, just an amount, a hospital name, and one instruction: make it anonymous. Put it under Lily Carter's name. By evening, the call came. The hospital informed Lily that her sister's full treatment had been covered, every cost erased. Ethan watched from the end of the hallway as Lily dropped to her knees, her hands over her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. The sound that followed wasn't sorrow. It was relief, joy, disbelief. Her soft sobs echoed down the marble hall, filling it with a kind of life it hadn't known in years. Ethan stayed hidden, his heart heavy and light all at once. The next morning, she came to work with puffy eyes and a radiant smile. She moved through the mansion with a brightness that seemed to push the shadows back. She even hummed, softly, joyfully, as she dusted the grand piano. Ethan couldn't keep the truth from her any longer. Later that day, he asked her to sit. His voice faltered as he admitted what he had done, how he'd pretended to sleep, how he'd doubted her, how he'd paid for Emma's care. For a moment, Lily just stared at him, eyes glistening. Then she smiled faintly, tears gathering once more. "Thank you," she whispered. 2 words, but they carried more grace than any speech he'd ever heard in his boardrooms. Something in him healed right then. Ethan Graves learned that morning that kindness isn't weakness. It's the kind of strength that money can't buy. Trust, he realized, wasn't built on contracts or control, but on humility, on the courage to care. The mansion changed after that. The air felt lighter. His mother laughed again, asking Lily to read to her each afternoon. The lilies in the hall seemed brighter, the silence softer. Lily stayed, not as a maid, but as a reminder. A quiet force that proved even in a world obsessed with power, goodness still had the strength to reach the coldest hearts. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything.